Hello, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to welcome you today. Thank you very much for joining this webinar hosted by Switch Asia in partnership with the European Environmental Bureau. And today's topic, as you can see, is about climate change, the ambitions and pragmatism shown at the recent negotiations for the climate change challenge that we're facing in the world, and what circular economy is bringing already as a actionable solution. I would like to remind you of a few housekeeping rules. If you have been on Switch Asia webinars before, this will not be new. Your microphones are muted, so there's no interference. But you can ask your questions on the chat or in the Q&A box at any moment. And during the webinar, we will distribute the questions to the speakers, and they can also, they're free to answer to you directly in the Q&A box. If you would like to, you can also try to raise your hand. We rarely have the time, but this webinar is a bit longer. It's 2 hours, so we may have the time to hear your remarks directly. And this webinar is recorded and will be available to all on our YouTube channel. And you can ask questions afterwards by email if you want. You will receive by email the PowerPoint that will be shown to you during this webinar. So on this note, I'd like to leave the floor to the chair of this webinar, Dr. Arab Hobala, who is a senior expert of Switch Asia in sustainable consumption and production, and also the team leader of the newly launched EU-Turkey Sustainable Industry Transformation Project. And he will be followed by a keynote address by Mr. Niklas Svenningsson from the UNFCCC. So now I leave the floor to Arab, who is chairing this webinar and co-moderating with my colleague, Mr. Ranga Palavala, who is the climate change expert of the Switch Asia Policy Support Component. So I'll leave the floor to Arab.
Thank you very much, Elodie. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Thank you really for the speakers and panelists. I know that for some of them, it was a little bit difficult to rearrange their calendar after the COP meetings and the UNEA meeting for some of you. So really thank you, and we are very thankful about that. Let me share just a few ideas, few elements before giving the floor to Niklas. In December 15, the Paris Agreement was adopted, and it aims to limit the global average temperature increase to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Some people are talking already about 2, if not 2.5, and to increase parties' ability to adapt to the adverse impact of climate change and make financial flows consistent with the pathway towards low greenhouse gas emission and climate resilient development. To that end, the parties have been communicating about their NDCs, with some of them very ambitious. Meanwhile, these collective NDCs, I take them as a package, are expected to deliver on the promise to ramp up renewables and transition away from fossil fuels. At the Bonn June climate meetings in preparation for the annual COP, the closing statement included a renewed call for fossil fuels phase out, concerns about limited progress on technology, and the need to clear roadmaps for the $1.3 trillion in climate finance to deliver concrete milestones. It also puts the most vulnerable at the center and supports a tripling of adaptation finance. As you know, we are not yet there. Expectations from COP30 in Belém in Brazil were very high, including on NDCs. While concerns about climate change are on the rise and negotiations will continue for the many years to come, it's important to remind ourselves that climate change is not just about CO2. It's mainly about, from our perspective, overconsumption and irresponsible production, irresponsible extraction and use of materials. If actions at individual level are important, it is through collective action for common good based on the principles of SCP and circular economy that the fight against climate impacts and building the path towards sustainability can be achieved. Although there was no unanimous agreement on a roadmap from COP30, there was progress on few important issues, in particular with regard to circular economy and its impact on reducing emissions. Important to note that COP30 was the first COP to include circular economy in its thematic days, directly building on the global stocktake and part of the Brazilian presidency call for a push on implementation. It gave the opportunity to discuss about energy transition and digital transition, as well as the importance of developing circular value chain for bio-based materials as a mean for reducing emission, improving sequestrations, and helping nature to thrive, and need for fair, accurate circular economy emissions accounting. From there on, it's expected that there will be more in-depth discussion on the importance of circular economy in the context of the various sectors, such as climate transition industry, transport, agriculture, urban and waste sectors. These will send important signals on where next COPs and next climate action should focus, and to tackle the large part of the emissions, about 40%, some say even 45 to 50%, that come from how we produce and consume, resulting in needed energy transition to be completed by a circular economy transition, so as to help reducing emissions, build resilience, support innovation, and tackle waste, pollution, and biodiversity losses, which were the subject of the last UNEA also. Of course, such transformative progress will require stronger negotiated progress in other areas, including a unanimous agreement to develop a roadmap for a transition away from fossil fuels, which has been a critical issue in the last meeting in Belém. Guided by science and economy, policymakers can bridge the gap between what is possible and what is needed by knowingly advancing policy that will be well received by most, embracing pragmatism to build a trust before handling the most serious and complicated issues, starting with what is possible, creating momentum, and helping catalyze new technologies, new economics, and new politics, making accelerated change possible. The current webinar that is bringing us together has four objectives: to assess the key conclusions, decisions, and direction from UNFCCC, with special reference to integration of circular economy principles into climate mitigation and adaptation strategies, to explore how the circular economy climate linkages could support the operationalization of COP30 outcomes and their potential impact to de-risk and attract public and private finance, thereby transforming market and value chain towards low carbon and climate resilient economies. Third, to discuss the policies, partnerships, and support mechanism required to empower businesses, particularly small and medium enterprises, which are always the elephant in the room in all the COPs, as central actors in implementing circular, local, and resilient solutions at scale, and to discuss and derive concrete policy guidance and actionable strategies for the COPs stocktake, focusing on how to effectively implement the material circular economy climate nexus for accelerated on-the-ground results, We are really very, very grateful that you have accepted to join us and to contribute to the discussion. You have received a set of questions, draft one, that we will be sharing with you later on. You might have noticed that we indicated that most of the question will be asked to 2 or 3 of you in different panels, which means that each question, when it will be raised, it will have to be replied either through a policy perspective or through a business and entrepreneurship perspective. So please keep this in mind. If you are in the policy panel or if you are in business and entrepreneurship panel, you will have the same question, but we expect you to reply to that from the different perspective. With this, thank you very much. And I'll give the floor to my colleague and very close friend, Nicholas Venningson, for the keynote speech.
Okay, thank you so much, Ara. I would like to ask that maybe we can put some slides on the screen. And while that is happening, I want to thank Switch Asia and EEB for organizing this timely and very interesting workshop and webinar. I think it's the right time. So could you please go back to the previous slide? People always think this is not a slide because there's no text. But for me, this is maybe the most important slide that you can show when you're talking about climate change. This is the so-called climate stripes that Reading University in UK develops. What it is a time from left to right, from 1850 on the left to 2024 on the right, where each stripe is 1 year, and the color of the stripe represents the average temperature at that time. The darker blue, the colder it was, the darker red, the hotter it was. And what we can see here, and this is for the whole world, is that something is happening with the climates. And we know what it is. It is global warming, man-made global warming. We know the causes and we know the effects, and we know that this is critical for our society and our planet for us to deal with. So just to put us, that is the basis for all the work we're doing in UNFCCC. Now we can go over to the next slide. So I was asked to talk about the circular economy, the COP, the UNFCCC process. And I think it's maybe good to start with a recap of something that many of you know, but maybe really haven't internalized fully. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC or UN Climate Change, it's basically an intergovernmental process. So it's between the governments, it's government to government, to help each other to address climate change. It is recognized that this is a global problem that no country can resolve on their own. We have to work together. We have 198 parties, or rather 197 governments plus the European Union as a supranational party. And each party has a veto, which is explaining why it's so very, very difficult for us to achieve decisions and progress in the negotiations sometimes. Just trying to get, an agreement on what is a good flavor of ice cream is difficult. But when you're talking then about economy and changing energy systems and infrastructure and agriculture, that gets so much more difficult. What is also not very well known is that in addition to the 198 parties, we have 4,000 accredited observer organizations, making UNFCCC the most transparent UN organization in the world. At a typical COP, we have about 140 agenda items. Only the parties can propose what is going to be discussed, and very often these agenda items are carried from COP to COP. And today we have normally about 50,000 participants at a COP. And while we talk about COP as one meeting, it is actually, if you look at it, 7,000 separate individual meetings where each meeting has an agenda, a chair or co-chair, and a rapporteur, and they're feeding into each other. About 3,000 of these are negotiation meetings. The others are mandated events, side events, presidency events, etc. So this really shows maybe why the intergovernmental climate negotiations is at times really, really difficult, not only to understand, but also to see progress in. But there is good news. And the good news is that we already have the big agreement that we need. And that is, of course, the Paris Agreement, adopted almost exactly 10 years ago. And there's much to say about the Paris Agreement. I just want to highlight two things. First of all, the temperature goals. There's a hard target of limiting greenhouse gas emissions and global warming to below 2.0 degrees Celsius, below pre-industrial levels. But there is also an additional ambition to keep it below 1.5 degrees. Unfortunately, 2024 was the first year where we saw that the global temperatures exceeded, or the global warming exceeded 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we're probably going to see more. It's going to get worse before it's getting better, very likely. Furthermore, these targets in the Paris Agreement are collectively adopted. All countries, all parties agree to them. But the action that implements these targets, they are individually assigned to each country. Each country has an individual responsibility for taking action that contributes to the collective ambition. Now, a main tool in the Paris Agreement is the National Climate Action Plans. We call them Naturally Determined Contributions, NDCs, and they have to be submitted every 5 years by the parties. These plans are basically describing what each party commit themselves to do to contribute to this collective ambition. And 2025 was the last time when, or the latest time when countries had to submit their NDCs. Until today, I think we have received 123 updated or new NDCs from around the world. We're still waiting for a few big ones, India, India, Saudi Arabia, and a few more. What we can see from the NDCs we have received so far is that ambition is not where it needs to be. If ambition is implemented according to NDCs, we will still see climate change of up to 2.3 to 2.8 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. However, it's not all bad news, because if we didn't have NDCs, we would be heading towards 4+ degrees Celsius warming, which would really be very, very bad for everybody on this planet. The good thing, and just to make the point that these NDCs, even though they are not strong enough, they carry some very important messages, and in particular that we are seeing that almost all NDCs are now shifting from reducing emissions to from reducing the growth rate of emissions to actually reducing the emissions. And if I can have the next slide, this next slide is just giving an example. It's a sample of different countries that have submitted their NDC so far. And what you have here is a reduction target. You have a target here by when they have said that these emissions should be achieved, and you have a reference to when do they compare. So if they're saying Australia says 60 to 70% by 2035, so it's 60 to 70% reduction in relation to the emissions in 2005. Now, I don't want you to look at each individual countries. I mean, it's interesting, but that's not what we're going to do here. The big message here is that every single country say that they're going to reduce emission, and they're going to do that within the next 10 years. That is a massive change in how our countries and societies and economies operate. Could have next, please. Next slide. Okay, so if we now go back to the COP30, what did we have? Many people are disappointed that we didn't have a big agreement. But as I already said, we don't need a big agreement. We have the big agreement we'll have. And often, many people look at COP with maybe exaggerated expectation. The fact is that out of these 140 agenda items that we had, many of them delivered very useful and helpful decisions. Not all of them, which is normal. When you negotiate, some will go and some will not go. And I'm not going to go into this into detail, just to mention a few things. Carbon markets are now finally making the transition from the Kyoto Protocol Clean Development Mechanism into the Paris Agreement Article 6. CDM is being closed now. By the end of next year, it will not exist any longer. You have a new just transition mechanism established. You have a global goal on adaptation. It includes about 60 indicators which are voluntary to report on. The question is how useful that is, but that's as far as we got. We have work programs on finance, technology, capacity building, public awareness training and participation, the ACE agenda, as we call it, Action for Climate Empowerment, new gender work plan, loss and damage, and much more. So this went through. It's positive, didn't make many big waves in media or in the public awareness, I think. But there were a few things that were discussed, but where you didn't have a major outcome. One thing was the NDC ambition. And this is interesting because the NDC ambition, while it's true that we have 122 NDCs that are collectively telling us a story that we're not ambitious enough, this was not one of the agenda items to be discussed at COP30. They are going to be discussed as part of the global stocktake, which starts next year. So we didn't have a decision about that, but we had sort of a compromise where the presidencies, the current and the incoming presidencies, decided to start two processes. One is called the Global Implementation Accelerator, and the other one is a Belém roadmap to 1.5 degrees. The accelerator is really looking how can we accelerate and support implementation. This is what Arab mentioned. And the Belém roadmap is really about how can we increase ambition so that we actually meet the collective ambitions with our NDCs. So this is good, even if we don't have a strong text about NDC ambition in the COP decisions. As part of this, there was also a discussion about phasing out fossil fuels. At COP28 in Dubai, in UAE, 2 years ago, there was a decision that fossil fuels will have to be phased out. And some countries wanted to translate this into a more concrete roadmap, some 80 countries, and that was blocked by some fossil fuel producing countries, Saudi Arabia, Russia, India, and some others. So that didn't go anywhere. But there was a unilateral decision by some of these countries saying, okay, so instead of that, we're going to organize an international conference on the just transition away from fossil fuels. This will happen in Colombia in April this year. It's not formally part of UNFCCC process, but you can see a movement in that direction. And then finally, climate finance, another issue that was actually already decided at COP29 in Baku, where parties agreed on a new finance target of 300 billion by 2035 from developed to developing countries with additional goal of 1.3 trillion US dollars per year from all sources, not only from developed to developing countries. In an unusual display of honesty, I think that our finance negotiators actually said that, you know, we don't really know what we're talking about. They're referring to Article 2.1 in the Paris Agreement, which is talking about aligning financial flows with low carbon development. But the language to describe what is climate finance is not there. And they just said, okay, we will start or continue these discussions under a new process we call the Veredas Dialogue, and we will have to start again from the start. Maybe it's not very positive, but it's at least honest. And then thirdly, there was a number of things that came out from COP, which were not really so much negotiated, but were very important signals. First of all, out of 195 governments, out of 198 parties, only one stayed away from negotiations. United States, or the Trump administration, to be really honest there, I think it was really a show of force that multilateralism and collaboration works and will continue. And this is, of course, very important for an issue such as climate change, which is a global issue. Secondly, there was a broadly felt sentiment that we need to move from theoretical negotiations to practical implementation. And this really speaks to circular economy of society. I'm coming back to that in a moment. And then finally, also, not very much talked about, but there is actually a new approach to non-party engagement. So how do we achieve collaboration between policymakers and governments and the real economy, the private sector, subnational authorities, cities, and civil society? Now, if we could have the next slide, please. Okay, so if you're talking about circular economy, what should you really look at for in the UNFCCC process? Well, should we have a COP decision? Well, the point I want to make is that COP very rarely go into practical details about how things are going to be done. They do go into details about what needs to be done. We are going to limit emissions. We are going to have a gender action work program. We are going to have an adaptation fund, etc., etc. But it is really up to each country to decide how are we going to do this. So I personally do not believe that there will be a decision about circular economy per se in COP, not in the current form of COPs. Secondly, should we look for better NDCs? Yes, we should, but I will come back to this in a moment. The NDCs we have now are not so bad from a circular economy perspective. Thirdly, should we try to enable country-level actions and regional-level actions? Yes, definitely. That is where I would say the inflection point for action really is between circular economy and global international policymaking. And that also speaks to the need to connect the policies with the real economy. Now, let me go over to see how is circular economy reflected in NDCs. So I'm from Sweden, and in Sweden, when we're talking about things that are very popular, we say kärt barn har många namn. And for our Finnish-speaking colleagues here, it said rakala lapsala on monta nimene. It means a dear child has many names. And one thing I have learned working on circular economy topics for more than 30 years is that there is circular not economy, but when you talk about circular economy, there are many associated approaches that are maybe not always called circular economy, but that to very large mean circular economy. And if you look at that, if you look on resource efficiency, waste to value, closed loop, etc., and you look at the NDCs, almost all NDCs refers to circular economy as an approach to implement the NDCs. This is important. So then the question is, what concrete circular economy hooks are there in the COP30 outcome? Because I said that, no, there wasn't really a decision about circular economy. I mean, certainly there was a thematic day about circular economy, which is very good, but that is not the same thing that parties are going to negotiate about circular economy. Well, I see two things. One thing is the action agenda, which I'll come back to in the next slide, I hope, and then the global implementation accelerator. So if you can have the next slide, please. So the global action agenda was actually created in the Paris Agreement. It started out by appointing two high-level champions. So each presidency, each COP presidency appoints a high-level champion for 2 years. And those two high-level champions, they oversee the climate action agenda, which basically has the purpose of bringing together policymakers with the private sector, cities, civil society work together. Now, what happened in Belém is that we're seeing a shift from 10 years of what I would describe semi-structured networking to more focused collaboration. So the climate action agenda from Belém, it brings together 480 different pre-existing initiatives and organizations to work on 170 plans to accelerate solution across 6 axes. And you can see those 6 axes here in the slide. This climate action agenda is voluntary in nature, so it requires dedication and collaboration among participants, and it requires follow-up by the Brazilian presidency and by future presidencies. And it's not entirely fully clear, at least not to me yet, how this is going to really work, but that is where we are today. Now, if you look at the climate action reports that came out of COP30, 55 pages describing these 117 plans to accelerate, and you're looking for circular economy, you are going to be very disappointed. Because circular economy is directly mentioned only one, related to waste recycling. And other associated approaches like closed loop or waste reduction or 3R is only indirectly referred to. So this, as a circular economy professional, makes me very, very disappointed. And I'm wondering what that is telling us. And I'm sure all of you will have thoughts about this. For me, it speaks to the fact that this is a mix of pre-existing initiative without really, an organizing theory or a conceptual framework. And I think that the circular economy could be a very good organizing framework for this work. That is never going to be negotiated in the COP setting, but it can be, I think, implemented, inserted by engaging in this climate action agenda. If I could please have the next slide. Okay, so this is almost my last slide. So just to try to respond to the question, how can the circular economic community contribute to this? Well, first of all, from a UNFCCC perspective, what we're seeing now is that we need to translate high-level policies, especially the NDCs, into actionable plans, investable plans at country and local levels. Now, from UNFCCC, this is a homework of governments. We rely on the governments to do that. And what we can see is that not all governments are really up to the task. They need coaching, they need encouragement, they need support. And we certainly don't have the practical knowledge about the context or the challenges or the opportunities at the natural, local, regional levels. This is what the circular economy community often does, because we have been working in the circular economy community for 30, 40, 50 years on these issues. And we know that this approach works. But the challenges that we see from circular economy is, how do we scale them up? How do we replicate them? How do we even maintain them if there is no supporting policies? So the way I see it, we need to get the right policies in place, inspired and guided by maybe COP decisions and other global decisions, but speaking to the local context and with the buy-in of local stakeholders. So what we know is that one-way policymaking really doesn't work. So bringing the actors together is very much a key priority action for circular economy, in my view. Now, if I could go over to the last slide, I would try to summarize what I have said here. So my concluding thought is that if you look at the COP process of UNFCCC intergovernmental negotiations, you can see that there is a dynamic between the what and the how. The what is often discussed in COP. Sometimes there are decisions about it. The how is left to the countries to decide how to do. And that is where the focus for our work should be. You can also look at, if you look at the NDCs and circular economy, there is very good connections. There's a lot of hooks, there's a lot of opportunities to hook on the circular economy approach into the NDCs. But you can also see that outside that, in the climate action agenda, which I think is going to become more and more important as we're going forward, the uptake of circular economy as a conceptual framework and as a practical approach, it's not there yet. So finally, I think that there is an inflection point, and that is by bringing together the policymakers with the real actors on the ground. And I see few societies or communities are better fit to do that than the circular economy, than you guys on this call. So thank you so much. I will stop here, and I hope this is helpful. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. It is very informative, very helpful. I think all of us who have been learning a lot from that. And definitely you have so many points here that we can take on board. Starting with the color strips was really engaging. I mean, it put you there already, start raising the question, and an excellent way of entering it. And then you end up by showing us the opportunities for circular economy at the end of the day to make a change. So we do have there, from all what has been agreed, discussed, and so on, an opportunity for circular economy to help effectively moving from the policies to the actions by bringing all the actors together. That's precisely what we are here for, and we'll try to discuss. And I like very much your dear child has many names. This is exactly what I not in your language, but I used to say about consumption and production, because everybody is dealing with it, but nobody is naming it. And that's exactly for the same for me. So thank you very much. And we'll certainly come back to some of your elements to go deeper during the question, if you will accept to remain with us.
Happily, thank you.
Thank you very much. So let us move now to the first panel, which is on policies and means of implementation, pathway for alternative action. And I'm sure that the colleagues together with Ranga Palawala will be taking some of your elements here, in fact, and go deeper on that. Ranga, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Arab. And of course, we are starting on a really good base with Nicholas' excellent presentation to give us talk on how we are planning to move ahead with integrating circular economy, sustainable consumption and production aspects within the UNFCCC. May I request to put on the slides of the first panel? And the first panel, of course, we have a really good panel. We have 4 people. Just to introduce, we have Mr. Michael Buki, the Minister Councillor for Environment and Agriculture at the European Union delegation to Thailand. And then we have Mr. Luke Powell. He's the Senior Policy Officer for Air Quality, Agriculture in the European Environmental Bureau. And we have Nicholas Hagelberg, the coordinator of the sub-program of climate action within the UNEP Climate Change Division. And then last but not least, we have Ms. Tenzin Wangmo. She's the climate diplomacy advisor at the end of the LDC support in the climate analytics. So thank you so much for everyone for be here in the discussion. So may I first go to Michael, to you, to start with, because Nicholas started with his presentation with the stripes to show how bad we are doing in terms of climate change, reducing the emissions, and make sure that we maintain the predictable climate and a livable planet. But one of the important things is that how can we achieve ambitious emission reduction, especially from high-emitting sectors like energy, industry, buildings, transport. And at the same time, we have, on the other hand, we need to build resilience, so we need to strike the balance. So what multipliers and accelerators could enable the action at scale to go for high emission reduction? So you can go ahead from the perspective of the European policies as well, Michael.
Thank you very much, Ranga, and thank you very much to Switch Asia, to EEB, to Arab, and to Niklas, and to the fellow panelists for offering us this opportunity to look back on COP30 from a circular economy perspective. It's a real pleasure for me to speak to an audience of circular economy practitioners and experts. That's a bit the story of my life for the past 15 years. I had the privilege to be part of the negotiations in the UNFCCC until the Paris Agreement. And then I came to Asia to try and make it work on the ground and like bridge that gap between action and ambition, more on forestry, which is my background, but increasingly on circular economy. And if I look back on the results of COP, I very much share and echo the perspective from Niklas. The biggest achievement is that the biggest country and emitter has left the room, and the conversation goes as strong as ever. At the same time, there was a feeling that we need to build a new alliance, and we need to take into better account that the world is bigger than the convention, and that the practicalities, not only the level of ambition, but also the how we achieve mitigation needs to be addressed in a more thorough fashion, and taking into account the various perspectives and priorities of different countries at different level of development. But it's not really new. in my mind, there is always these moments where we have a stock take of how much we have achieved or how much the policies that are planned are going to take us closer to the goal, and then it's not enough. So we say we need more ambition, more ambition, more ambition. We agree to like push the boundary or the envelope a little more, and then we turn to the real world. We turn to the experts back at home, and the next COP we look into the details of what is possible. So there are. I mean, if looking from this perspective at the outcome, there are many things which are missing, especially regarding the phasing out of fossil fuels. But there are also emerging coalitions of the willing, which involve like 100 parties. So if you leave India, Saudi Arabia, and US out, you still have a very strong momentum towards halting and reversing deforestation or transitioning away from fossil fuels in a just, orderly, and equitable manner. That's what the presidency set itself to achieve. Now, if you look specifically at circular economy, again, the glass is only half full, if we want to put it optimistically. But I see different areas. One thing that is to be noted is that there will be dialogues on trade and climate. So looking at, okay, we need green goods, we need trade, and we need like to make it work for everyone. But specifically, how do we describe, how do we incentivize the green goods that are actually contributing to achieving mitigation? There was something else. There were a lot of discussions and rather divisive about the synergies between the Rio conventions. So climate, biodiversity, and desertification are the big ones. But as we are getting closer to a legally binding agreement on ending plastic pollution, there is certainly something to say about circular economy as well in this context. But from the EU perspective, the central space for discussing about circular economy within the convention is the MWP, the Mitigation Work Program. That's where we managed to keep the conversation alive on how and where greenhouse gas emission could fall faster. And it was not for granted. It was negotiated under a lot of pressure because there are some parties that express concern that the MWP could become a backdoor for new obligations, new constraint, external pressure, and so on and so on. And yet, despite those doubts and concerns, the parties eventually allowed the MWP to continue. And that sends signals through a range of global dialogues and investment-focused events. And that matters because it's one of those areas where we still talk openly about how we implement mitigation and not only how much mitigation is needed. So these discussions were noted in the COP30 outcome, but circular economy appears only once in the mitigation text and more as a co-benefits. It does not reflect the full potential of circular economy yet, and we cannot expect everything from the MWP itself when it comes to driving circular economy ambitions. The parties' appetite remains limited and the language remains very cautious. But it's still a milestone and it legitimizes circular economy as an enabler of mitigation, of course, but also a broader contributor or enabler to NDC implementation and one area where the parties can act together for climate and co-benefits. Specifically on the MWP, and mentioning circular economy under the MWP, that opens for dedicated exchange on finance, on capacities, on governance and policy, and concrete promising technologies or business models. So it presents circular economy not as a goal but as a mean. Specifically, there was also a dialogue in Addis Ababa and a report that looked into what works on the ground already from a climate perspective, waste prevention and reduction, recycling, sorting technologies, organic waste and agro residues, valorization, the notion of industrial symbiosis, where one sector waste can become the another sector's input, circular construction, including, and that's interesting, the reuse of material and modular design, job creation, poverty reduction, cleaner city, etc. All the suites of circular economy co-benefits. So now that was my general perspective on a big event and a complex set of reports and decisions. But if I summarize, the takeaway is we should not wait for the UNFCCC to deliver on circular economy. It's very well that we were acknowledged. I mean, we, the circular economy community and enthusiasts, but the MWP is not a driver, it's an amplifier. It helps us to frame circular economy as climate relevant, which needed to be reaffirmed. It links projects to NDC and mitigation targets, and therefore to climate finance. It starts a conversation on technology and capacity, and the necessity to build new coalition across waste categories, across industries, across cities, etc., etc. So my biggest frustration personally is that circular economy was misconstrued as a co-benefit, like a niche market of green-minded premium consumers. I think it should rather be framed as a core strategy for mitigation and sustainable growth. The MWP only gives a small opening, but it's opening public and private. This opening can allow public and private sector to work out profitably to anchor the circular economy in NDC better in a more explicit fashion. As you say, it has many names. I think we should try and stick to a more limited number of acronyms, but the idea is there and it will keep on building. It's useful because it helps to justify more predictable, longer term investments. As I said, I'm myself, I have a background in bioeconomy. And if you look at the mitigation trajectory of the European Union, the land use category is almost a rounding error. It's a small negative under a very large positive emissions. But if you iterate that up to 2050, half of the economy is bioeconomy because those sinks, they need to be able to compensate whatever outstanding emissions remain once you have mitigated as far as you can in all other sectors. So the importance of what in Thailand we call bio green circular economy as an enabler and as a condition actually of reaching carbon neutrality, I think is an invitation to work more also on circular economy. So that's what we can get from the process. But to paraphrase, don't ask what the convention can do for circular economy, ask what the circular economy can do for the convention. And I think it's very important that with those little hooks that we have now, we feed back this experience. We try and quantify the extent to which not only circular products, but circular services and business models can translate into emission reductions across the board. In the EU, and that will be my last sentence, of course, we have a regulatory framework and compliance, and that helps. But increasingly, we look at how we can empower the investors, the producers, the traders, and the consumers to better identify and prioritize more sustainable product and services. And I think that's also where there is a lot of potential to identify what is circular or what takes us in the direction of circular economy. If you look at the EUDR, the sustainable products regulation, or the packaging and packaging waste regulation, we really go in this direction of not only you have to respect certain norms, but you have to inform about whether the consumers draw benefits from going circular or going resource efficient. Okay, sorry, that was a long answer to a short question, but I hope it captures the main thinking of the EU after the COP. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michael. Of course, it carries a lot of information and a lot of points there. As you correctly mentioned, the mitigation work program, of course, it's a good hook, and where we can see how circular economy can help to implement climate action and help the convention to roll out. I think it's a good answer, build on what Nicholas mentioned in his keynote address as well. Now, I would like to turn to Luke, to you. And we know, of course, we have heard that circular economy can be an enabler and it can be a core strategy. But from you, I would like to ask how the global community look at and their consciousness toward the unsustainable consumption and production pattern and irresponsible extraction and processing of material has direct link that links towards the climate challenges. And how could these be better mainstream in climate policies and their program? And if you can give some examples, that will be great. So I would like to hear from you, Luke, on this.
Thank you very much, Ranga. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone here. It's a real pleasure to be joining you. So, of course, I come from a slightly more agricultural background within the European Environmental Bureau, so that's probably the link that I'll make most here. First off, I'll say within the European community, at least, we look at things like the European Barometer, which is a really good indicator of 85% of respondents consider climate change to be a serious problem. But when we talk about climate change, we still continue to ignore consumption patterns and food systems for far too long. Our economic systems continue to extract and consume and waste resources much faster than our planet can regenerate them, and that overconsumption and overdependence on raw material extractions are the root cause of the crisis from our perspective. Climate neutrality absolutely cannot be achieved without taking on overconsumption. Resource extraction and processing account for over half of global greenhouse gas emissions. And the problem is still framed as an energy issue. It's really ignoring food. And this is a lot because of the kind of political barriers that exist, particularly within the EU, but I think this applies globally as well. But for us, globally, 42% of food, 42% of emissions comes from food. So when you're talking about methane in particular, which is one of the major ones that we're concerned about that doesn't get addressed enough. So one metaphor for the way that we need to reframe this thinking is that if your sink is overflowing, you need to turn off the tap before you start mopping up the floor. Food could be, food inherently can be the most circular economy system that we have. Its nutrient cycles in the natural world are inherently quite circular, but for continents like the EU, the overconsumption of meat and dairy in particular results in importing nutrients from other countries and overseas in the form of feed, and that disrupts that cycle, and it changes the impact on land in both the places where you're extracting it from, but also the place where all of that builds up as manure and waste, which you then have to deal with and try and find a way to recirculate in another way. For the CCAC, modeling shows that methane action in particular is essential for staying under 2 degrees and 1.5 alone. So, but the problem is that we're still seeing it rising. We only have reduced the overall increase projection to be a rise of 8% by 2030 and 17% by 2050. So the message from the CCAC at COP was, we're bending this curve, but it's actually still increasing currently. The EU has been really effective at reducing methane overall across sectors, but agriculture has continued to be the lagging piece of that puzzle, and it's because the increase in consumption patterns, particularly of meat and dairy, has been outpacing the efficiency gains that we can find. So, when you're talking about circular economy, if you're increasing how much you're able to, recirculate back around, but you're still increasing how much you consume overall, then you're not going to feel the benefit of that circularity the way that you need to. So from our perspective, Some of the really important things is that the CCAC did point to indices that would cut methane by 2030 by up to 8% below 2020 levels. So that picture is still positive that if we do all of the things that countries are committing to, we can save 180,000 premature deaths and 19 million tons of crop losses annually by 2030. Those are primarily because of the impact of methane as a precursor to ozone, which then ends up damaging your health and your human health and health of crops. So we want to see governments switching away from following the kind of lobby interests of big industry and go more towards market-based, avoid the kind of market-based mechanisms that we kept seeing come again to COP30. What we want to see is real system change in terms of what we're consuming and how we're consuming it, and not just attempts to offset or kind of find little efficiencies. We think that some of the positive things that can be done is recognizing the crossover between climate and air quality. When you talk about the positive impacts of methane, not just for the climate, but also for individuals' health, this translates very well in terms of being able to make a case for the economic benefits for your country for taking these kinds of actions and changing your consumption patterns. We think that this means including explicit methane pathways and targets in your food system transformation in NDCs. Currently, NDCs, only 4% of them have methane targets for agriculture, and this is something that we consider still really needs to change. For agriculture, it really is about reframing this as being beneficial to the industry. You can have more efficient production when you do a better mix of plant-based and agroecology and move away from intensive livestock production. But it's a case of supporting industries to be able to make that change, because the kind of upfront investment cost of it is often the barrier. So the last kind of thing that I'll leave you with then is that building climate resilient livestock systems in smallholder and pastoral settings can deliver multiple benefits, and it's about improving productivity while reducing emissions.
Thank you, Thank you very much, Luke, for that the comment. And at the same time, I can see there are two questions. In the one, of course, it's a question, and other one is a comment, and I request the panelists to take up those questions. And one is about how to interpret the circular economy within the climate context. The question is about climate ambition is looked as a kind of a hold of the growth. So circular economy could be an answer. Can we interpret in that way? Second one, of course, it's about the comment of the LIFE program of India, whether it can be a kind of a signal from the Indian government on sustainable consumption and production. Anyway, I would like to turn to Nicholas Hagelberg from UNEP for the next intervention. And we know about the science, the discussions happening, and of course, there are certain mention about the clarity of science is there, but we are running out of time, and we need to do we need to deliver so many things in a quite a small time limit. Is our government and the business leaders sensible in the argument about climate ambition, and are there chances that they will act based on their the ambition statements? What do you think about it? What's your take on that, Nicholas?
Thank you, Ranga, and it's a pleasure for me also to be here. So thanks for the invite. I feel that climate change is a little bit like a puzzle. It's very much about getting the building blocks in place. You have to be quite systematic. You have to start perhaps with the corner pieces, the frames, and you get the colors and so on. Science is part of those building elements. So for us to get 198 or 197 countries to speak the same language, it's important that they speak about the same science and that they have the same understanding of the data. So if we then look at the information from IPCC about that all the scenarios to keeping 1.5 degree alive included some kind of carbon dioxide removal. If emissions don't come down, now we're quite clear that the emissions have not come down fast enough, and the ambition in the next NDCs, those that are supposed to be delivered by 2035, we have a situation where it is now inevitable that 1.5 degree we are likely to see an overshoot. So the science is clear, but that's not sufficient to change the direction of this big ship. It is, however, a clear guidance for how that common global ambition should stack up. And if we wouldn't have the science, we would not even know then that the ambition that has been put forward in those 122, 123 NDCs doesn't stack up. So that said, in the final end, it really is the economics that will determine if a solution is being picked up by the economy or not. And the good news is that we can see quite a number of the key climate solutions, starting with renewable energy, coming in and starting to replace fossil fuels and starting to be the cheapest form of electricity production in most parts of the world. So in that sense, that type of science, the economics numbers, is really what makes or break the pathway to decarbonization and also building the resilience. So the second one then, and even though there is really strong data on the job markets, so how renewable electricity, for example, already accounts for more jobs across the world than in the fossil fuel sector, how there's more better gender balance in the renewable sector, it still doesn't drive the political decision making. So even though we are able to bring like really compelling science on the environment side, on how climate is changing, how the opportunities are there for economic development, and how it can have an impact on job sectors, even all those pieces are not sufficient. So then we get into the numbers around economic opportunities. So obviously those countries that are heavily dependent on fossil fuels, they are still going to be reluctant in negotiations to start talking about fossil fuels and so on. Whereas those countries that have done a good advancement already on renewable energy, on electric mobility, perhaps alternative proteins. Luke was talking about agriculture there. So those countries are going to be much more willing to move forward as well. And those companies that see an economic opportunity here, they are also going to be the most active proponents. Perhaps a final point still on the science is that now how science is produced under or collected, convened under the IPCC process is that it's about 1,400 scientists that bring all the information together, but then the summaries for policymakers still go through some kind of negotiation process where countries try again to all come together and agree on the language around the science. And while the IPCC scientists are not willing to change the facts, there is still changes in the wording. So that has also an influence on what then countries negotiate. And one last point on COP30 in Belém. So countries struggle to agree on when the next global stocktake will take place, how it will contribute into to the next NDCs. So even though there is a clear science process around the UNFCCC deliberations and those action tracks, we still struggle to then move jointly forward on that science. Back to you, Ranga.
All right. Thank you so much, Nicholas, for highlighting that science is an important part of the whole jigsaw puzzle of climate action. But still, we do have challenges about the interpretation and bringing it strongly. And of course, we see positive signs in that as well. So in this panel, now I would like to turn towards Tenzin. And Tenzin, of course, have engaged as well in the national processes as well. We heard circular economy has been mainly discussed at the UNFCCC level under the mitigation work program, and of course, it's been indirectly mentioned in different ways. But at the same time, encouraging fact is that we see some of the countries have deliberately included circular economy aspects within their NDCs, so giving a kind of a bottom-up push. How crucial this discussion's happening. We saw also a kind of a dedicated circular economy day at COP30 as well. So how crucial this is as a milestone in the UNFCCC process to bring circular economy into climate action and climate ambition.
Yeah, thank you, Ranga, and also the Switch Asia for inviting me to join the panel experts here in today's discussion on circular economy, and also to reflect back on a COP outcome of COP30, and also see how countries could accelerate climate actions through the circular economy approach and responding to limiting warming to 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement. So I also wanted to reflect a little bit on the NDC submissions. For many of the developing countries, in particular the vulnerable countries, the 1.5 degree goal is not just a goal. To many of them, this is a survival threshold. This is a lifeline for them. So throughout 2025, they advocated and called on parties to submit NDC that are 1.5 degree aligned. So reflecting on that, going to Berlin, only 64 parties have submitted their updated NDCs, but now I also learned that there are 123 parties that have submitted now. So collectively, the emission reduction projection was only 17% below the 2029 level. But the UNFCCC Secretariat, Executive Secretary also mentioned that in order to provide a wider picture of the global response, they have also added additional calculation based on targets submitted and also announcement made, including at the UN Secretary General Climate Summit in New York. So overall global emission, but still fall much behind, because it shows only 10% by 2035. So this is a huge concerning and something that we really need to push for. However, I also wanted to reflect a little bit on the positive note, because the NDC synthesis report by the Secretariat showed that there is a progression in terms of the quality of the document. Also, there's a credibility, and also the NDC synthesis, NDC submitted provided economy-wide coverage, emission reduction. So compared to the previous NDCs, there's a lot of progression. And also to note that 88% of the countries have reported the NDC responding to the outcome of the first GST. So while it is not a requirement, but many of the countries have also included adaptation and resilience building, and also loss and damage as a core component of the NDC. And we also note that there's a significant progress made on integrating NDC elements of gender, youth engagement, indigenous people, and also just transition, carbon market. And few of the countries also mentioned about circular economy, providing a much more holistic plan, targets as well as programs which is ready for implementation. I also want to reflect on the governance part. The synthesis also reflects that at least 97% of the parties provided information on the legal and policy framework for the implementation of the NDCs. So this is very key for the climate action to accelerate. And on the institutional arrangement and also the capacities of the institutions, if you look at today, is far greater than 10 years ago. There is a greater clarity on the roles, responsibilities, and also in terms of coordination mechanisms at the national, subnational level, in terms of the preparation of the NDC and also the national adaptation plans, the long-term strategies, as well as implementation, monitoring, and reporting obligations under the Paris Agreement. So that's why, like, as we celebrate today or mark the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, I want to emphasize that while the NDCs, in terms of the ambition, we are far behind. It falls back on what the science says and is needed, but it has laid a very strong foundation to accelerate implementation. So countries, if we look at today in terms of how much has been progress, especially in terms of laying the foundation, I thought like we have achieved a lot, and that gives us a hope to achieve the goal of the limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And in this accelerated implementation, circular economy could play a big role, because as I think we already had a lot of views from other experts that this is, of course, there are hooks in the climate decision outcomes, but we could something that is to be operationalized at the country level. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tenzin.
Yes, over to you, Ranga.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tenzin, for that. The views, of course, I know that you have been engaged in the negotiations as well very closely, so your inputs are really valuable. I would love to put some more questions to the panel, but I'm a little bit concerned about the timing as well. So I think it's good to close this panel. But before the close the panel, I would like to thank for all the deliberation and ideas. And in summary, what we have seen is that, of course, circular economy has a good potential to contribute to amplify and enable climate action. And of course, there are core benefits which can be used as core strategic directions for the countries and parties to take forward circular economy as well as climate action. And at the same time, we have seen certain openings within the UNFCCC process. Of course, even though the chances are slim to have one whole dedicated negotiation stream on circular economy, but of course there will be a lot of opportunities within the process. Mitigation work program, as well as some of the countries providing circular economy linked NDCs, shows that the parties and the process is interested to look at this more detail. So there are positive sides. Of course, there are challenges that we need to navigate. So I'll hand it back to Arab to take forward to the next panel to elaborate more on this discussion. Arab, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you really put the slide of the second panel, please? I mean, we know them all, but it's good to have the slide on that. Okay, thank you very much. As you see, I'm bringing back Nicholas just for some in-depth question. I even been thinking about additional question for him, right? Not the one I raised there. We have with us also Denovan Story, the Technology and Economic Assessment Panel Manager and Waste Expert at the Climate and Clear Air Coalition. And some of the elements have been raised in the discussion about methane and so on. We have Mukesh Bulati, the Executive Director of Foundation for Micro, Small and Medium Enterprise Cluster, looking really at the SMEs aspect in this. And Manjit Dahal, the Head of LDC Support Team Climate Analytics. So let me move on the question, and I will try to abuse a little bit. I would like to bring in back Niklas Hedelberg and asking the same question for three persons. If we can reply quickly, and I would like to raise the other question there. So it's basically related to the transition away from fossil fuels. A lot of discussion around that, but there has been examples of action taken by countries and by countries. Do you see visible steps related to collective actions, and what would you reasonably expect from the first international conference on the just transition away from fossil fuel to be organized in Colombia in April 26? The same question to Niklas, to Mukesh, and to Manjit, please. Niklas, briefly, if you can, please.
Sorry, Arab, what was this, me, Niklas?
No, Niklas Hedelberg. No, not the other. Niklas, I leave him till the end. Niklas Benningsen will be till the end. I'm not Niklas Hedelberg.
It's not the first time this has happened, by the way.
No, it's Niklas Heidelberg, please.
Okay, I would like to draw your attention to a report called the Production Gap Report. It kind of is a follow-up on the emission gap report, where it looks at country national emissions or the emission reduction plans, so the NDCs, and then it looks at fossil fuel production plans. So countries are still, fossil fuel producing countries are still planning to produce double the amount of fossil fuel that is compatible with the Paris Agreement the temperature targets. So that we haven't seen a progress there. There's like one country that we can see that they're planning to reduce their production, but it's also the same country where otherwise the production, just in terms of how much fossil fuels they had, is on a downward trajectory. Coming over to the conference in April that will be organized by Colombia and Netherlands as part of the response to COP30, the transition away from fossil fuels discussion. We don't have details yet what will be discussed, but I believe that it will be more of a political rally around the effort to reduce or to transition away from fossil fuels. So I think that's what that conference will be, but let's not think that conference alone will be the solution. So the Beyond Oil and Gas grouping of countries, then perhaps the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, they are also important. In the final end, country dependence on fossil fuel is where their economies need to diversify. And here I would like to just point to one country, Iraq, who is dependent to 85% of their government income on fossil fuels. So obviously, it's not an easy equation for them to transition away from fossil fuel. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and for bridging between the two panels. Can I ask now, Manjit Dahal, from the LDC perspective, do you see any progress related to transition away from fossil fuel? Do you see any positive action going ahead in this context?
Thank you, Arab, and really appreciate this opportunity to speak here, both to Switch Asia and also to EEB. No, I think this is very interesting. I was in those rooms in COP28 when we were negotiating this at the very final hours. The transitioning away from fossil fuel, as well as tripling the renewable energy and so on, that was not very easy. That was a tough negotiation to be included in that paragraph 28, a very famous one in the global stocktake negotiation decision text. I myself lead the global stocktake related discussion for the least developed country group. So obviously that has been a big challenge, and then also in the negotiation process, we see there are governments who still doesn't want to talk about that decision that was taken in COP28. There are views from some who believe that that was a decision taken and we can never track progress on that. For us, in the negotiation from the least developed country group, even though our emissions are extremely low, we believe that if the world can't limit the temperature rise to 1.5 degree, we will be the one in the front line to be impacted. So with that in context, there are many countries in LDCs who have been taking this action and have presented as an example, so that if the countries in LDCs can do that, why not others? I think in that context, this has given a very positive signal in terms of the transitioning away from fossil fuel, those phrases that were there in the global stocktake decision in COP28. I think it also depends on how do we interpret, how do we implement it in our respective countries. Maybe the governments at the government's level in the negotiation, maybe we are still negotiating, but I believe this has provided a very strong signal to the private sector, to the business community outside, and then who have already been aspiring their action to transition away from fossil fuel and tripling the energy and doubling energy efficiency, and so on. I think from coming from the Paris Agreement, as we are celebrating the 10 years anniversary, and the context that we were when we were negotiating the Paris, where the temperature would have been rising maybe above 4 degrees Celsius. Now we are around 2.6, 2.7, so which is also another positive signal. But that's obviously not enough in terms of where we need to go. I think despite of all of this, the progress we have been making, we still see for many countries in many regions, the fossil fuel, the investment on the fossil fuel is still continuing, outpace the clean energy in some of the region. The transition risk falling unfairly on the workforce or the community in some of the developing countries, something that needs to be taken note. And that's where I think this negotiation about the transitioning, the just transition has something evolved, has made a good progress recently in Belém as well, with the new mechanism being established, and the progress made in the work plan. But having said this, the just transition should not be something presented as an option, not as an excuse not to take action, because what we believe coming from the least developed countries where our economies are more fragile is that the more delay we do in taking climate action, the more delay we do in terms of achieving 1.5 degree, the more impacts that we will be facing. So I think in that context, obviously, the implementation of this just transition principle, preserving job, rights, skill, and the livelihood has to be in the center. The role of the international community to provide finance to a developing country is something important, but I think the ambition is also equally important as well. Now, getting back to this first international conference on transitioning away from fossil fuel to be held in Colombia, I think this really provide a good opportunity to feed this to the process. I was hearing Nicholas' presentation at the beginning. Obviously, this may not have included as a formal part of the COP decision, but obviously this will have a huge influence in terms of the process. This is something the COP president made an announcement at the closing plenary. So I think it would be really helpful the conference help with some practical and with some shared understanding of what the just fossil fuel phase out will look like across the region. Some concrete pathways in terms of jobs, the social protection, and how the diversification can be done in terms of the economy. Also, some strong collaboration, cooperation between the governments, private sector, the financial actor, and help to provide a global roadmap to complement the work that we have been doing in the UNFCCC process. I think the transition is obviously possible, but obviously has to be done in a planned and funded and in the fair way. The COP30 has reminded us that with many decisions where 1.5 degree has been referred, which is an absolute important target, and even 2 degrees much more where the impacts will be, and that's how the phrase has been included there. So I believe that this conference, as well as the momentum that has been gained from COP30, has to move forward from this first conference. Yep, I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. Let me now bring in, sorry for the how I will call you, for bring in the elephant in the room. Mukhaj Gulati, who has been who is representing the small and medium enterprises, and we need really everyone is referring to the SMEs without knowing exactly how to work with them. And can you, from your perspective, and well, of course I'll have other questions, have you seen in the business and entrepreneurship arena some progress in transitioning away from the fossil fuels? Are there good steps for collective action? Do you have some examples?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
We do.
Hello?
Yes, we do. We're here.
Hello? Am I audible?
Mohit Gulati, yes. No, Mohit. Yes, Mr. Gulati?
Yeah, okay. If you can hear me, great. Thank you, Arab, and thank you, Switch Asia, for bringing me in. Yeah. So MSMEs is considered to be just from the size perspective. But MSMEs are also very heterogeneous in their working. And in the Indian context, particularly, the MSMEs are very significant in terms of their contribution to GDP, employment, and exports. And the sectors are obviously similar in terms of textile, apparel, etc. Now, when you ask me what is the extent or what are the indicators to reflect what is the extent to which the fossil fuel is being used, so I would say that one part is the energy efficiency itself, which is very critical. But another important part is the promotion of the renewable energy. Government has taken up lots of initiatives and providing significant incentives for setting up rooftop solars, but not the off-grid, not the collective groups where you can have an off-site common MSME solar park, which could then essentially provide electricity to the individual enterprises. But one scheme which is there both at the state level and also at the national level is the incentive program, which enables the capital investment subsidy for setting up of your solar rooftops, and also some of the wind mills. And the offtake is very significant in this area. Now, initially, the government of India started with what are called the PAT scheme, the Perform, Achieve, and Trade, which is very similar to the carbon credit system. So basically, if you perform better than a threshold in a particular sector, then you earn certain credits, which you can then sell it to those enterprises which are willing to buy it. But these are the kind of programs which were so far functioning only for the large enterprises, particularly in the hard to abate energy sectors like energy plants, steel, cement, etc. But the government is now bringing in programs specifically for the MSMEs also. And if you look at some of the clusters where particularly which are close to those areas where the pollution levels are very high, those are the areas where the government has also specifically banned the use of fossil fuel. This is something that had started some 20 years ago, particularly around the Taj Mahal area where the Taj trapezium is there. So all the clusters which were around, they were not allowed to use fossil fuel. And that required a huge transition from fossil fuel to gas-based energy. And even close to Delhi, the NCR region, which is you must be reading through the media, there are strong disincentives for using coal, and therefore clusters like Panipat, for example, are not allowed to use fossil fuel, and they can certainly use biomass. They can also use solar energy. They can also use electricity, but not coal and not any other form of fossil fuel. So there are significant what you call steps which have been taken. But when you say that whether these have been collective actions on the part of the MSMEs, that is not something which has been so far done. But that is something which is being discussed and debated by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency and the Ministry of Renewable Energy on how one can set up maybe common facilities for giving services like shared steam, compressed air, and certain other common facilities where the most energy intensive operations can be undertaken collectively. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. I'll come later on with another question. Let me now turn to Danovan's story. I'd like to combine two questions. Most countries have announced their updated NDCs to the climate objectives. We heard about the number here. To what extent do you believe they have effectively guided and contributed to climate change policies that are realistic? And at the same time, how can we achieve emission reduction from high emitting sectors like energy, industry, building, transport, while building resilience? What are the multipliers and accelerators that you have seen also in your sector for this? Donovan?
Thank you, Arab. Great questions and really good presentations, which have sort of set up what I'd like to also contribute. I think, as Nicholas pointed out earlier on, I think that NDCs can be considered a positive legacy of the Paris framework. They have focused national attention on setting goals. They've identified key sectors. I think they've driven strengthening of data and the communication of progress in an open way. I think also over time, the NDC framework has become more elaborate. It's starting to identify more sectors, as we can see over time, particularly in the NDC 3.0 round. I think it's now evident that NDCs and reporting have now accounting for a wider range of greenhouse gases, and they've outlined clear pathways to implementation in some contexts, including finance, which is a point that I'd like to elaborate on a little bit. Now, in the recent NDC 3.0 round, we've seen more holistic approaches, which is great in terms of providing opportunities of thinking about circular economy. I think that one of the other benefits that we've seen is the inclusion of more stakeholders, such as civil society organizations and research institutions in establishing goals and methodologies. We're seeing more attention to financing transitions away from polluting fuels. And we're seeing a greater range of GHGs addressed, as I said. For example, where I work in CCAC, we focus on short-lived climate pollutants, which have driven around half of recent global warming. And we now see around 60%, around 2/3 of NDCs, which are including clear methane focus areas, which is a significant increase. But importantly, a caveat on that, only around a quarter have quantified targets, and this is an area that we have to really strengthen in terms of NDCs. So NDCs have been a very positive legacy of the Paris framework, but they're still falling short of what's needed, as several speakers have pointed out. The first global stocktake illustrated this gap. The gap is growing, and so there's no avoiding the reality that NDCs are still falling short of the ambition that we need, particularly in terms of measurable targets, details, and means of implementation. And I think going back on earlier comments as well, many lack a theory of change, such as circular economy, for example, and they remain very much sector focused approaches rather than more holistic strategies. I think it's important to note also something which has emerged over the last few years, which is, of course, is very important for the process. We're seeing greater attention to transparency and reporting through the biennial transparency reports, the BTR process. And that's coalesced into what's referred to as the TAC principles. That is transparency, accuracy, completeness, comparability, and consistency. And I think that the BTR process is going to be really important in terms of tracking implementation of NDCs and supporting countries to strengthen their inventories, but more importantly, to identify where the capacity, technology, and finance gaps to bridge the NDC ambition with actual achievement. And I think that the BTR process is an important tool going forward in terms of supporting countries in more rapid transitions. I think, as the phrase goes, we don't have time to waste time. I think in terms of your second part of your question, Arab, one of the things that we need to understand is that there can really be no effective resilience in the context of spiraling emissions. And so we need to look at ways in which we meet country development needs, and particularly in the global south, with low emission pathways. And at CCAC, as you pointed out earlier on, one initiative that we're developing in support of our partner countries is the establishment of the Technology and Economic Assessment Panel, CCAC TEEP, which is based very much on the successful Montreal Protocol TEEP. And that our CCAC TEEP is really designed to identify and assess proven and scalable best practices and technologies to reduce emissions, especially in terms of understanding costs, economic viability of different technologies, the market readiness and potential barriers to deployment of new technologies. We want to be able to develop reports and focus areas in waste and agriculture and fossil fuels, in terms of clean energy and transport, to be able to also establish a financial plan to be able to mobilize entrepreneurship and private sector engagement to speed up the adoption of technologies and practices, including those, of course, which support circular economy. And I feel that this initiative, if I could just finally express that this initiative is, I think, the kind of getting to the heart of the how question that we talked about earlier on in the webinar. We need to focus more on how. We kind of know the what, we're establishing the what, it's very important, but how? How do we bring about the change that's required? How do we accelerate transitions? How can we go to scale? And I think that is the how, answering the how questions is really filling the missing middle of ambition and achievement. So thank you for the chance to share those thoughts, Aaron.
Thank you very much. Filling the missing middle, extremely important issue that I use also to refer to when I talk about the small and medium enterprises, and this is extremely important in this context. I'll come back to you later on another question, Donovan, even though I combined here, but I will have a third question for you. Manjit Dahal, the same question related to the NDCs and climate objective. How much in your context, when it comes to the LDCs, you believe that the NDCs have effectively guided and contributed to climate change policies that are more realistic, pragmatic, and implementable, in case you have some examples?
Thank you, Arab. I think since the Paris Agreement, we have seen the real progress, as I mentioned earlier. The NDCs are no longer only the abstract places, but they have also been helping the government to shape the country policy, the energy policies at the country level, the investment plan, and also the long-term strategies. As it was presented at the very beginning, based on the latest submission of the NDC, just as a few days before COP30, the global emission would reduce by about 12% below 2019 level by 2035, which obviously is a significant shift compared to where we came from, the pre-Paris trajectory. But however, this is also not sufficient in terms of where the science have called for. By 2030, the emission has to go 43% below 2019 level and 60% below by 2035. So there is much needs to be done. I think also as it was mentioned in the presentation, Belim was also able to reaffirm this, even though the negotiations were not that easy. But some of these examples, like the Belim mission to 1.5, or the global implementation indicators, which are included in the Muchirao decision, which is a main decision that coming out from the COP30, has a strong reference in terms of taking forward this momentum ahead to implement the NDCs. Also, National Adaptation Plan and other. So I think the situation that we are in now, COP30 has helped to redefine how the ambition can be assessed by having a very clear message in terms of where the world needs to go, where the gaps are, what support the developing countries are looking for, but having said this, also I think the role of the major emitters will remain very important. The And particularly here, I think we can't obviously miss talking about the G20, which obviously includes developed country as well as the developing countries. Moreover, the major economies as well, because more than 80% of the emission remains there. So there is much that the least developed countries can do to help provide the momentum, but and that's what our countries has been doing, despite the constraint in terms of the financial capital, despite the constraint in terms of the institutional challenge, and many other. But I think there is also much the global community, and particularly the major emitters, need to feel this pressure, need to get inspired from how the countries in the front line in terms of climate change are taking action. At the LDC Chair's office, we regularly have been reaching out to our countries to check where the countries are in terms of submission of the NDCs. And more than half of the LDCs are in the preparation mode. Very few have submitted, but the group has been very much been motivated with the principle that it's very important for us to take action, and we are taking this action not only for others, but it's for ourselves as well, because making investment in the current context where the technology is in a transforming mode, we can't get stuck on the stranded assets. And there is not much that our countries can do, but there isn't this aspiration where the support in terms of the action that the LDCs have presented, the targets that the LDCs have presented in their NDCs remains important. I think the way we talk about tripling renewable energy, one of the other landmark decision from COP30 was also about tripling adaptation finance, even though that's not exactly how we got, because the ask was about tripling the adaptation finance by 2030. Now we have this up to 2035 without having a clear reference in terms of the baseline. And I'm referring this because for many of the least developed countries, the NDC also includes the targets on adaptation. So overall, I believe that maybe the COP30 may not have solved all these challenges, but it has again put the world on track in terms of implementation. So this both action, the major emitters coming forward with an ambitious NDCs, and also the mobilization of support to the developing countries, more for the countries in the front line, to bridge the emission gap would be helpful. Before I close, the NDCs that Nepal has submitted, where we were involved through climate analytics, but also as a member of delegates, the total cost for the NDC implementation for the partial costing that we have done is about 70 billion US dollar, where the country have also plays to put about 10 billion US dollar by the country itself. Yeah, so this the message, and that's the kind of message that we have seen from many of the countries in the front line, despite their economic constraint, that we want to take action. There is little we can do, and that's the resources that we have, but we want to do more, and that's where the role of the international collaboration comes in, the international support comes in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very clear message at the end. We are willing to move on, but we have to move together. So let the others also come and join us in moving further on that. Donovan, I told you I'll be coming back to you. You referred to this ambition, the goal, scalability, practices. It's the last question that I have put there, but I would like to start with you asking you this. It says, it's a quote that I have took from somebody from Columbia University. Year after year, we debate ambition gaps, and we have heard about it a lot here today, while overlooking the very tools that would allow countries to not only meet but exceed their NDCs. How can we really go out of this just ambition gap and effectively identify the right tool, the right implementation mechanism? Why are we short on that? And what can be done, at least in the sector that in which you are working more than others? How can we ensure that we have policies with implementation mechanism that go along, and not just very ambitious NDCs, and everybody says, if we ever implement them all, we will be at that level, but we still have to implement them. We are not there. So what does this tells you? What does it implies you?
Well, I think, Arab, that it's important to note that certainly in our work on short-lived climate pollutants, many of the technologies actually that are required to rapidly decrease emissions in terms of meeting the global methane pledge are already known, and they are fundamentally highly investable. So what we need to do is we need to close the gap in between what we know as being effective, the policy ambition, and we need to support countries in terms of finance, technology, and capacity to be able to adopt technologies, to be able to adopt positive and forward-looking policy and regulatory environments to be able to support the inclusion of innovation in particular. And it's unlocking that innovation, and it's taking away the barriers to transforming technologies, and also opening up to different forms of investment. And that includes domestic finance and domestic investment as well, which I think is critical to change. So we have a lot of known knowns, and I think it's important to recognize that. And I think it's in terms of today's event as well, when we talked about, well, we don't need a new global framework on climate change because we have one. We just have to make it work better. And it's very similar in terms of the technologies and the finance needs, and also the opportunities that exist in having lower carbon and lower emission economies. We know what's required, and we see more and more NDCs starting to recognize this and starting to become much more comprehensive, increasingly, maybe not at the scale and pace that we would like, but increasingly becoming more ambitious. So I think it's up to the global community to look at NDCs, to look at the biennial transparency reporting process, and to look for opportunities. Because surely it's in those documents and it's in those processes in which the vast majority of countries are engaging, where the possibilities for change lie. And I do think that, obviously one of the reasons that CCAC established this technology and economic assessment panel is to, as I was saying before, is to be able to address those how questions, because we need to move to those how questions now. We already kind of know the what, The science is fairly much established and consistent. And so we need to move to, well, how can we bring about the change that's required? And I think that that's the really exciting place at the moment that we're in terms of the communities that we work in. And I know, Arab, you're an enormous supporter of SMEs and grassroots communities and the opportunities that can be unleashed there in terms of domestic economies and livelihoods and so on, and support of circularity. And it's that kind of space, the house space. How do we scale? How do we get technologies and policy frameworks in place? How do we invest in the right kinds of economies that are future oriented and obviously are climate smart and support resilience? It's in those how questions, I think, where a lot of exciting work lies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You are rightly connecting to the question I had for Niklas Venningsen. Niklas, you ended up, you have so many important issues that you raised, but you ended up by 2 points on which I wish to have your little bit more in-depth thought and exchange with us. One was the dynamic between the what and the how, and that's exactly what Donovan was saying here. And the other one was about the inflection point, bringing policymakers to action on the ground. Can you, after what you have heard during this 1.5 to 2 hours, tell us a little bit more about your insights on moving from the what to the how and this important inflection point?
Okay, thank you so much. And yes, I have really enjoyed listening to the discussions here. And I actually could just refer to all the previous speakers and I would be done. But maybe highlight a couple of things there. The what to the how, as I said, the intergovernmental negotiations, they like to talk about the what. They are rarely able to talk about the how. That doesn't mean that the how doesn't happen at COP, because a majority of the participants who go to COP today actually talk about the how. And that is all the side events, all the president's events, all the action agenda events, and a whole lot of other discussions happening that are not directly connected to the negotiations, but which are highlighted there. And I think there are many people who are feeling a frustration that all this good thinking, all this moment goes into a meeting where the spotlight is not really on that. The spotlight is on the negotiations. And there is a discussion about COP reform for many different reasons, not only because we have problems getting progress in the negotiations themselves, but also recognition that the how is becoming more and more important. We're talking about the climate action agenda. There are suggestions about, creating some kind of a climate action COP, maybe not separate from, but a little bit, better coordinated with what is happening with the negotiations. But I think that is at a global level, and the what to the how and the inflection point, what I'm talking about is, it's really what previous speakers have alluded to, is that we have the solutions. We actually know what is working. And we are seeing in a couple of examples, like, for example, renewable energy, which has made a tremendous progress over the past years. And when you're asking yourself, why is renewable energy making such progress when other solutions to climate change are still, stuttering a little bit? And I think it is because it is possible to show with renewable energy in the terms that politicians and policymakers really understand and care about, which often is related to economics, but it's also linked to other national development priorities, that this actually makes sense. The long-term investment in renewable energy is so much better for the country and for other priorities than continue fighting with fossil fuels. And when I'm mentioning that also, because you had a question about this energy transition and fossil fuels earlier, and I think one thing that I like to keep in mind is that while the International Energy Agency has said that if we're going to really switch from a fossil-based system to a renewable or a clean energy-based system, we will need investments in the tune of $4 trillion per year. And that sounds like a lot of money, considering that the finance target in UNFCCC is 300 billion, or at the stretch 1.3 trillion. But you also need to compare that with all the money that is already going in there. This is not mainly new money. It's money that needs to be shifted into the right investment. The accumulated annual fossil fuel subsidies today amounts to $7 trillion per year. So you compare that with 4 trillion to invest in renewable energy, or 7 trillion to keep fossil fuels going. So this should not be so difficult for politicians and policymakers to internalize and start acting on when they are seeing that. And I think that this is also what we need to do with all the other aspects of circular economy. It's really to bring together the policymakers with the people who understands and have the solutions, because those solutions are there. We know that today. And to put packages in a language that doesn't take days and days and days of hard study to understand, but something that is politically obvious, that this is a good investment and a good direction for the national politics. And this past year, I have spent a lot of time working on the national development, the NDCs, the national determined contributions. And what we have seen, that the ones that are maybe most ambitious are the countries where they have really been able to connect, for example, mitigation agenda or adaptation and resilience agenda with economic development, with job, with health, with a little bit long-term future-proofing of the success of the country overall. And I think that is where we need to go. And I don't think those discussions are happening enough today. I think a few good examples where we have seen different actors bringing together the national policymakers with the national private sector, with the labor unions, with the civil society, with cities, to sit around the same table and say, okay, we know what we need to do. How are we going to do it? That is where I think we need to go much more. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. What excellent conclusion. I should not even say any word more, but thank you very much, Nicholas. I mean, this was very clear. Thank you very much. Very inspiring. I would be tempted, if Mikhail Buki is still with us, if you want to, I mean, European Union has been so active in this field when it comes to climate and circular economy, looking at the implementation mechanism behind the policies and needed for the policies. How do you see what a possible progress from the what to the how, not only on how the EU is doing it, but how this can be extrapolated to the rest of the world? Mikhail is still with us?
Yes, I'm here, Arab. Thanks for the questions. I don't know. I mean, it's a very tall order. But my sense is that if circular economy makes progress and affirms itself as a core strategy, as I mentioned in climate action, it will not be because it appears more often in COP decisions. I fully concur that you cannot mix global climate action with the multilateral decisions. The multilateral decisions, by nature, they are built on constructive ambiguity. So we agree on a very small number of keywords that live on from decision to decision, which are recalled and so on. So it becomes part of the dialogue. That has happened. That has happened at a very minor level, but that has happened. There is a catalog of things that you can do in circular economy that have climate benefits. I mean, it's important to keep it alive. It's important to keep the flame. But at the same time, if it advances, I think because it makes more and more business sense, it becomes more familiar, it becomes more convenient to the producers and to the consumers. So if I was to put my face in one thing, it will be in those dialogues on climate. They started a process that I'm almost sure it will focus on things like CBAM and EUDR, and in a very defensive way. Oh, we are not ready. Oh, it's so expensive, and etc. etc. I'm doing CBAM. I'm doing EUDR. In practice, it's not so complicated, but it does change the way people do business. And we are seeing emerging economies like ourselves that are not very rich in resources, that are trade oriented, that wants to have a level playing field, that want to have standards, and that's I think where we can make a difference. Show that it works at home, show that it can be scaled up, show that it can be mutually beneficial. We are going through a phase now. I mean, I'm personally a big believer that whether we like it or not, the flow of data is going to become exponential. We have generated, it's a figure I like to quote, but I think it's important to keep in mind. We have generated in the past 2 years more data than we have generated since the first computer. It's going to happen again in 3 years, and maybe in 2 years, and then maybe each year it will double again and again and again. We cannot sustain that just because of the amount of energy that it takes. But there is clearly power in data, and a lot of the circular economy business models, they are not about so much closing the loop, but thinning the loop, making it and then slowing down the loop. And this notion of design to last, design to repair, it comes with very strong data requirements. So one thing that we have done, for example, in the context of the eco design and sustainable products directive, is to create the notion of a product passport. And this product passport, basically, it's to allow upstream traceability. When you buy something, you want to know whether you can repair it, whether it's made of sustainable material, whether it will be upgradable, whether you can find the spare parts, whether it contains substance of concerns, and if it comes to be recycled or upgraded, what could you do with it? So the more and more we will look at what we buy, not only from the perspective of what quality it has today, but how long it can keep its quality, whether it can be safely shared and reused, whether it will keep its value in the longer run. There are many new questions that come with the product, and I think that's where on the interoperability of those emerging standards, emerging norms, that's where I would personally put my my efforts. But that's a very cross-cutting theme across a number of things that we are doing. They were done because we care. We care very much. I think as European consumers, we care very much, and so it was possible for our industries to accept and embrace those new circular economy business models. To what extent and at which space it will spread to the rest of the world is I think proportionate to whether they see it as beneficial. So that's where we are for now. Beneficial for the environment, obviously, but also for their socioeconomic development. And that's personally where I put my face. If we can have international rules of trade that allow for this transition towards circularity, this transition towards bioeconomy, to be mutually profitable, to come with technologies that can be adapted or recognized, acknowledged across borders, I think that's where we stand the best chance. So COP gave us a spark, maybe a flame, but it's for us to carry the torch. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. What you are aiming at, it takes time, and that's what we have been doing. I recall very well since we started the whole program on sustainable consumption and production. In fact, we started by learning from what the EU is doing and trying to see how we can adapt it, translate it, and convince the group of 77 in China, as we call them, to really see an interest there. And the same is now happening with circular economy. It will apply then to CBAM and so on. So learning by doing, learning from experience, learning from good practices, we can move on. The same applies for your product passport. That is something growing in terms of product traceability, how it's coming from, how it's constituted, what are the material where coming from, and so on. It's progressing. You are advancing on that, but slowly and slowly we will be together demonstrating to the other economies that it speaks economically to you. There are benefits. So let me now attempt a brief conclusion. I will not take 10 minutes, as sometimes I can do it. Very briefly, just taking some words from here. Clearly on this climate issue, COP30 has shown that multilateralism working collectively work. We can work in groups, it's progressing. We need to progress more and more from policy to implementation. This is the way to go. It will be difficult, but there are opportunities on moving further. And the new approach from non-party engagement is a positive step, but not the only one to move further. We need to be very clear on what we are talking about when it comes to a dear child that has many names. Just explain very clearly what we are talking about. Define it precisely and look at how we can implement it. Circular economy is definitely an opportunity in this context, but it needs to be related and connected to the economic benefit. We need to demonstrate that it works, it is good economically, otherwise countries will not move on that. And it could be an extremely important mechanism to effectively deliver on climate actions through that. And that's why we have been working in Switch Asia and try to see how we can mainstream SCP and circular economy in NDCs, not just for policy matters, but on how it can effectively assist the policymakers in moving slowly to the how, not just to the what. The finance exists, the money is there. I mean, not just referring to the subsidies, just to see how we can allocate it, where we should allocate it when we understand how to move on that. Solution exists. I think we have been repeating this for decades. I always say we have all the technologies we need. We don't need to reinvent. Let us implement them, and then we will see if we need something else. We need how to move there, but we definitely need to work together. Means not only government. We need to bring the business sector, small and medium enterprises, big companies, the knowledge. So multi-stakeholder consultation, dialogue, public-private partnership are absolutely essential in order to move from the what to the how, and using the data, which can become effectively a very powerful element in order to inform the global community and moving further on this issue. So we don't have time to waste time. We need to move further. Definitely, we still on talking about issue. We need to accelerate implementation. But as you all said it, and we hope that the global community can more and more understand it, we do know how to do it. We do have practical solutions. We do have good business cases. It has been demonstrated. It needs to be replicated, accelerated, and scaled up. Thank you very much. Thank you all for all the time, what you shared with us. And I give it back to Elodie, if anything else from your side, or Ranga.
Nothing else except to say a big thank you to everyone for being with us and to the speakers for joining us.
Thank you all. Thank you,
Thank you,
Donovan,
Elodie.
Niklas,
Thank you,
Mikhail, Manjit, Ascension,
Thank you.
and so on. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.